Today we're talking about an old story, quite possibly one of the oldest stories on Earth, and definitely the oldest story I've talked about on this channel. This story comes from Mesopotamia. For those who didn't pay attention in middle school, Mesopotamia, aka the Fertile Crescent, was the birthplace of agriculture and the start of civilization. Considering civilizations started over 5,000 years ago, this stuff is wicked old, like older than paper. And because the myths we're talking about are so old, some of them have unfortunately been lost to time. And as usual with myths, the ones we have may differ with each other in slightly different ways. And this is because the stories were reimagined over generations. Now, with that mini historical context out of the way, let's talk about Ishtar, goddess of war, beauty, sex, and justice. Now, like I said, sourcing for Ishtar can be a bit hazy, because of how old Mesopotamian sources are. Normally I'd start a godly video by discussing her parentage, but that's a section of her life that's full of haze. She's generally accepted to be the daughter of Nana, god of the moon, but the origin of her birth is odd, because she only has one parent, and it's her father. Thankfully, there is something that is very consistent in her life, and that's her siblings. She has two of them, a twin brother, Utu, god of the sun, and a sister, Ereshkigal, queen of the Underworld. There is more to her family tree than just her immediate family though, and you can learn about that by watching this video by Useful Charts. He's showing off his cool new chart featuring the Mesopotamian Pantheon family tree. Definitely go check that out after watching this video. Ishtar also had a husband, Dumuzi, the god of shepherds. Now it's unclear if Dumuzi started as a human who became a god upon marrying Ishtar, or if he was always a god from the get-go. Again, sources vary. Regardless though, they were married, but it wasn't always that way. At first, Ishtar was swooning over a farmer, but her brother tried convincing her to marry the shepherd boy instead. He kept urging her towards the shepherd boy because he already arranged the marriage without her knowing. Ishtar wasn't too happy about that, and she went to ask some other family members what they thought. They all said that she and the shepherd boy would make a very good couple. Ishtar decided she would get married to Dumuzi, and they lived happily ever after. Until they didn't. One day, Ishtar was looking for power. Being the queen of heaven, she already had a lot of power, but she wanted more, so she decided to go to her sister's domain, the Underworld. Before Ishtar goes to the Underworld though, she told her servant Ninshubur to wait for her. She also said if Ninshubur doesn't hear from Ishtar in 3 days after entering the Underworld, Ninshubur should go to Ishtar's family to seek help. Ishtar then descended into the Underworld. When she finally made it to the gates of the Underworld, she demanded the gatekeeper let her in. And if he didn't, she would tear down the gates herself and raise the dead. The gatekeeper begged her not to tear down the gates, and he went to tell the Underworld queen of Ishtar's arrival. The gatekeeper told Ereshkigal that her sister was here, and Ereshkigal sighed. Ugh, what does she want now? The gatekeeper went back to let Ishtar into the Underworld, and as she walked through the first gate, he swiped her tiara. Ishtar was taken aback by this and demanded he return the tiara, but the gatekeeper said, "That's the rules of the Underworld. Every gate you travel through will require a piece of your clothing." Ishtar rolled her eyes and continued. She walked through 7 gates in total, and each one took the following pieces of clothing from her until she was naked. Ishtar stood before her sister naked and demanded power. Ereshkigal was insulted by this, and she cursed Ishtar with dozens of diseases and infections. The curse proved too much to handle, and Ishtar died right there on the floor of the Underworld. And I'll be honest, I don't think that really solves the problem, because Ishtar is still in the Underworld. Ereshkigal hasn't gotten rid of her. Anyway, with Ishtar dead, nobody on Earth is having a good time at night, which means there are no humans being born. Ninshubur noticed that 3 days had passed, and they went to go inform Ishtar's family of what happened. The whole family assumed Ishtar died, and they started mourning. Well, all except Ea, god of the southern sky. So this next part of the text is a bit confusing, because from what I read there's a tablet from the original missing, so bear with me. Depending on the version though, Ea creates either one being of androgynous gender, or 2 beings representing masculinity and femininity. I'm going to go with the androgynous one for that non-binary representation. So this newly created non-binary goes down to the Underworld to retrieve Ishtar. We don't know if they had to lose clothing too, because the tablet is missing, but it's assumed so. The non-binary explains the situation to Ereshkigal about how no one's being born, and Ereshkigal flips out, enraged at the non-binary for suggesting Ishtar should go back to the land of the living. But eventually she calms down and decides, yeah, it's probably best that Ishtar does go back, but only if they can find a suitable replacement for her in the Underworld. Ishtar and the non-binary go back to the surface world, escorted by some demons, and they search around for someone to take Ishtar's place. At first, they check some of Ishtar's family and friends, but she doesn't want to condemn any of them since they were all mourning her loss. Ishtar then sees Dumuzi, and at first, she's overjoyed to see him. But then, she sees what he's doing. Dumuzi is sitting underneath a tree getting pleasured by a slave. Ishtar is furious at this betrayal and directs the demons to take Dumuzi so that he may take her spot in the Underworld. That's Ishtar's story where she is a main character. She does appear elsewhere in some other scattered poetry, but that's her main myth. And the nice thing about this myth is that it does provide some insight as to how the Mesopotamians viewed their afterlife. They didn't see it as a reward system where the good are blessed for eternity while the evil are punished. Everyone went to the same place, good or bad, and they were all under the same set of underworld gods, who held power over the overworld gods. That stuff isn't explicitly related to Ishtar, but I thought it was interesting to bring up anyway, so I did. The next Ishtar story we're going to talk about comes from perhaps the most famous Mesopotamian myth, the Epic of Gilgamesh. I do plan to make a full video about the Epic of Gilgamesh eventually, but that'll definitely come after I finish grad school. For now, all you need to know is Gilgamesh is a demigod king of Uruk, and he's currently BFFs with this man-bull guy, Enkidu. Anyway, Ishtar was feeling kinda lonely after Dumuzi cheated on her, and she wasn't sure what to do until she saw Gilgamesh. She thought he was so attractive that she went down to the city of Uruk to propose to him. Yes, you heard me right, she is proposing to a guy she just met. Sounds straight out of a Disney film, doesn't it? Gilgamesh saw the red flags and turned down Ishtar's proposal. Well, I say turned down, more like full-on rejects her, and he goes on this huge tirade about how all her lovers have met gruesome ends because of her. Ishtar does not take this rejection well, and when she goes back up to heaven, she complains about how awful Gilgamesh is. Eventually, she gets the idea to let the bull of heaven trample around Uruk. Anu warns her that letting the bull do this could cause a famine, and Ishtar says, "Great, a famine will make people like him even less. This is such a good idea." Ishtar unleashes the bull of heaven on Uruk, but to her surprise, Gilgamesh and Enkidu kill it. Ishtar, now even more pissed off, tries cursing Gilgamesh, but Enkidu tells her to shut up. And similarly to Gilgamesh, he kinda goes overboard. He cuts off the thigh of the bull of heaven, and then chucks it at Ishtar. After having a bull thigh thrown at her, Ishtar is now beyond angry at this point, and she redirects her cursing towards Enkidu, and she wants to make him suffer. She inflicts him with a terrible plague that leaves him suffering for several days before he dies. Enkidu's death is what sets off the main quest of Gilgamesh, as he has an existential crisis over what happens when he dies. Oh, Gilgamesh, don't worry. Every millennial has that phase. And those are Ishtar's two main stories, and three if you count when she's picking a husband. Remember, this video is made in collaboration with Useful Charts, so you should definitely go check out his channel, where he's making the Mesopotamian family tree. If you're coming from that video, then welcome to Mythology with Mike. I'm Mike and I love sharing stories about mythologies all over the world. Why not stick around and watch some of my other videos? If you want to discuss mythology and talk with me, come join the Mythology Multiverse Discord server. I also have a Twitter and Discord of my own where I post memes, so you can go follow those if you want. And until next time, have a good one.